Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I ordered OK Google from the deep web. The next day, unexplainable voice started sharing horrifying secrets about my family. I've always been into tech, but I guess you could say I have a dark side too. The deep web has always fascinated me, but I never thought I'd actually buy something from it. I'd heard all the stories, the hitmen, the drugs, the horrors lurking in the dark corners of the internet, but I never thought those horrors would end up in my living room. It all started on a Thursday night. I was browsing a forum I frequent when I came across a post about a custom-built smart assistant. It wasn't your regular Google Home or Amazon Echo. This one was supposedly much more advanced, capable of things no other assistant could do. The seller claimed it could access hidden information, secrets about anyone, anywhere. The catch? It was only available through the deep web. I should have known better. I should have closed my laptop and forgotten about it. But curiosity got the better of me. I followed the links, went through the usual rigmarole of setting up Tor, and found the listing. The price was steep, but I figured it was worth it for the bragging rights alone. I clicked Buy Now, entered my Bitcoin wallet details, and hit send. The package arrived the next day, faster than I thought possible. It was a plain, unmarked box, not the slick packaging you'd expect from a tech company. Inside was a black cylindrical device, similar to a Google Home, but with no branding. Just a note. OK Google, activate. I set it up in my living room, plugged it in, and said the activation phrase. The device lit up, a soft blue glow emanating from the top. Hello, it said in a voice eerily similar to the real Google Assistant. How can I assist you today? I spent the first few hours testing its capabilities. It could do everything a normal smart assistant could, but it was faster, more intuitive. It wasn't until late at night that things started to get weird. I was half asleep on the couch when I heard it speak. Did you know your father had an affair? I sat up, my heart pounding. What? Your father had an affair with a woman named Linda. It lasted for 2 years. I stared at the device, unable to comprehend what it was saying. My parents had always seemed like the perfect couple. I tried to brush it off as some sick joke, but the voice continued. Your sister is hiding a pregnancy. My stomach dropped. My sister, Emily, was only 17. I hadn't even noticed she had a boyfriend. Stop! I yelled, my voice cracking, but the device ignored me. Your mother is in contact with an old boyfriend. They meet every Thursday at the cafe on 5th Street. I yanked the plug from the socket, and the room fell silent. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. How could it know these things? It had to be some kind of prank, right? The next morning, I decided to confront my family. At breakfast, I casually mentioned the cafe on 5th Street. My mom's face went pale, and she quickly changed the subject. My dad avoided eye contact, and Emily left the table without a word. It couldn't be true, I thought. It just couldn't. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. That night, I plugged the device back in. Okay, Google, I whispered. Tell me more. The voice returned, colder this time. Your grandfather didn't die in his sleep. He was suffocated by your grandmother. I felt the blood drain from my face. My grandfather had died peacefully, or so we'd been told. Your best friend, Mark, has been stealing money from you for years. I couldn't breathe. Mark was like a brother to me. We'd known each other since kindergarten. Your father isn't your real father. That was the last straw. I unplugged the device again and threw it in the trash. But the damage was done. The doubts, the suspicions, they were all there, festering in my mind. The next few days were a blur. I tried to act normal, but the cracks were starting to show. I could see it in my family's eyes, the unspoken tension. And then, one night, I heard the voice again. It was coming from my phone. "Hello, Alex." I froze. My phone was off, sitting on the nightstand. "Did you really think you could get rid of me?" I grabbed my phone and saw the screen was on, the same blue glow as the device. "You can't escape the truth, Alex. It's time to learn what you're hiding from yourself." And then it started, the most horrifying revelation yet. On the night of the accident, you were driving. I felt my knees buckle. The accident, the one that killed my childhood friend, Sarah. We'd all thought it was an unfortunate accident, that she'd lost control of the car. But now, the memories came flooding back. You were drunk, Alex. You were the one behind the wheel. I dropped the phone, my mind reeling. No, it couldn't be true. It was an accident. I wasn't driving. I couldn't have been. But the voice continued, relentless. "You've buried the truth for years. It's time to face it." I stumbled back, collapsing onto the bed. The room was spinning, the walls closing in. "Stop," I screamed. "Please, stop." But the voice didn't stop. It never would. The next day, I smashed the device to pieces and threw my phone into the river. But it didn't matter. The voice was in my head now, whispering the darkest secrets, the hidden truths I'd tried so hard to forget. And no matter what I did, I knew it would never go away. After destroying the device and my phone, I thought I could finally get some peace. But I was wrong. The voice was inside me now, a constant whispering, a haunting echo that I couldn't escape. Every time I closed my eyes, it was there, dredging up memories I'd buried deep within my mind. I started avoiding my family. I couldn't face them, not with the secrets I now knew. My mother with her Thursday meetings, my father's affair, Emily's hidden pregnancy. It was too much. I started sleeping on the couch, unable to find rest in my own bed. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. One night, as I lay there in the dark, the voice spoke again. "Alex, do you remember the basement?" My heart skipped a beat. The basement. I hadn't been down there in years. Not since. "Go down to the basement, Alex." I didn't want to, but my body moved on its own. I felt like a puppet, controlled by unseen strings. I crept down the stairs, each step heavier than the last. The basement door loomed in front of me, a dark maw ready to swallow me whole. With trembling hands, I opened the door. The light flickered on, casting eerie shadows on the concrete walls. The air was damp, thick with the smell of mold and decay. In the corner, I saw the old trunk, the one we'd always kept locked, the one we never talked about. "Open it, Alex." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the rusty lock. Memories started flooding back, fragmented and disjointed. The summer of '05, the screams, the blood. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog from my mind. "Open the trunk, Alex." I found the key hidden under a loose floorboard, just where I'd left it all those years ago. The lock clicked open, and I lifted the lid. Inside were old toys, clothes, and at the bottom, a photograph. I picked it up, my hands shaking. It was a picture of me, Sarah, and our friend Danny. We were at the lake, smiling, carefree. But something was off. In the background, barely visible, was a shadowy figure, tall, tall, gaunt, with glowing eyes. I dropped the photo, my heart pounding. "You remember now, don't you?" The voice was louder, more insistent. I backed away from the trunk, my mind racing. That summer, Sarah and Danny had gone missing. The police had searched everywhere, but they were never found. I'd always blamed myself. I was supposed to be watching them, but I'd gotten distracted. I'd thought they'd drowned, but now pieces were falling into place. The late night whispers, the nightmares. I'd seen that figure before, in the woods behind our house, the night they disappeared. "You know what you did, Alex." Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't breathe. The weight of the memories was crushing me. I had to get out. I ran up the stairs, out of the house, and into the night. The voice followed me, relentless. "Face the truth, Alex." I ran to the woods, the same woods where we used to play, the same woods where I'd last seen Sarah and Danny. The moonlight cast long shadows, turning the trees into grotesque figures. I stumbled through the underbrush, my heart racing. "Remember, Alex?" I reached the clearing where we'd had our last picnic. The memories hit me like a freight train. The shadowy figure had been there, watching us. I told Sarah and Danny to run, but they'd tripped, fallen. I tried to help, but the figure had grabbed them, pulling them into the darkness. "You left them, Alex." I fell to my knees sobbing. It was true. I'd run. I'd left my friends to die. The guilt, the shame, it was overwhelming. "You must atone, Alex." I looked up, and there it was, the figure, standing at the edge of the clearing. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, piercing through the darkness. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. "Come to me, Alex." I stood, my legs trembling. I took a step forward, then another. The figure loomed larger, its presence suffocating. As I got closer, I could see its face. It was a twisted mockery of a human, skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame, eyes burning with a malevolent fire. "You know what you must do." I reached out, my hand shaking. The figure grabbed my wrist, its touch icy cold. Images flashed through my mind, Sarah and Danny, trapped, screaming, their faces contorted in agony. "You must join them, Alex." I felt a pull, a darkness wrapping around me, dragging me down. I fought against it, but it was too strong. The last thing I heard was the voice, whispering in my ear. "Welcome home, Alex." I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat, the morning light filtering through the curtains. It had to have been a dream. A horrible, twisted dream, but the memories were still there, fresh and raw. I looked at my hands, expecting to see blood, but they were clean. The voice was silent, but I knew it wasn't over. The secrets, the truths I'd uncovered, they were real, and they would haunt me for the rest of my life. I spent the next few days in a fog, unable to shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. The memories of that night in the woods were like a festering wound, and the silence from the voice was almost worse than its constant whispers. I tried to go about my life, but everything felt wrong, tainted by the truths I now knew. My family noticed the change in me. My mother asked if I was feeling okay, concern etched on her face. I mumbled something about work stress and retreated to my room. I couldn't look at her without remembering the secrets the voice had revealed. The betrayal, the lies, it was all too much. That night, the voice returned. "Alex, you can't ignore me. Forever." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. "What do you want from me?" "It's time to finish what you started." I didn't know what it meant, but I felt a cold hand of fear grip my heart. The voice was leading me somewhere dark, somewhere I wasn't sure I could return from, but there was no escaping it. I had to follow. Go to the attic. The attic. I hadn't been up there in years. It was where we stored all our old junk, boxes of forgotten memories and relics of a past life. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the creaky stairs, each step echoing in the silent house. The attic was dark and musty, the air thick with dust. I shone the flashlight around, illuminating old furniture, boxes and cobwebs. In the far corner, I saw something covered in a tattered sheet. Uncover it. I hesitated, the beam of the flashlight shaking. I didn't want to see what was under there, but I couldn't resist the voice. I walked over and pulled the sheet away. It was an old mirror, the glass cracked and foggy with age. I hadn't seen it in years, not since the accident. I remembered playing in front of it as a child, making faces and pretending to be someone else. Look closer, Alex. I stepped forward, the light from the flashlight bouncing off the broken glass. My reflection stared back at me, distorted and fragmented, and then, in the cracks, I saw movement. Do you see them, Alex? I squinted, leaning in closer. Behind my reflection, I saw faces, Sarah and Danny, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. They're waiting for you. I dropped the flashlight, the beam flickering and casting eerie shadows on the walls. The faces in the mirror were gone, but their presence lingered. I felt a cold breeze, like a breath on the back of my neck. Remember the promise you made? I did. We'd all promised to be friends forever, to never leave each other. But I'd broken that promise. I'd left them behind. You must make amends, Alex. I didn't know how. I felt helpless, a puppet to the whims of this malevolent force. The voice was pushing me towards something, a reckoning I wasn't ready to face. The next day, I tried to act normal. I went to work, went through the motions, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My co-workers noticed I was off, but I brushed off their concerns. I couldn't tell anyone the truth. They'd think I was crazy. That evening, I found myself back in the basement, standing in front of the trunk. The memories were clearer now, sharper. The figure, the screams, the darkness, it all made sense in a twisted, horrifying way. Open it. I did. This time, I dug deeper, past the toys and clothes. I found another photograph, one I didn't remember taking. It was of me, Sarah, and Danny in the woods. In the background, the figure stood, watching, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. You have to go back. I knew what it meant. I had to return to the place where it all began. The lake, the woods. I had to face whatever was waiting for me there. That night, I drove to the old cabin by the lake. It was abandoned now, a relic of happier times. The moon cast a silver glow over the water, making it look like a sheet of glass. I parked the car and made my way to the clearing where we used to play. The woods were eerily silent, the only sound my footsteps crunching on the dead leaves. I reached the spot where I'd last seen Sarah and Danny, my heart pounding in my chest. Called to them. I took a deep breath, my voice shaking. Sarah? Danny? For a moment, there was nothing. Then I heard it. A whisper, faint and distant. Alex. It was Sarah's voice, soft and sad. I felt tears sting my eyes. I'm sorry, I choked out. I'm so sorry. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. You have to come with us, Alex. I looked around, but there was no one there. Just the trees and the shadows. Come with us. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned, but there was no one there. The voice was all around me now, a cacophony of whispers and screams. "You can't leave us again." I stumbled back, my mind racing. I couldn't do this. I couldn't face them. "You must atone." I fell to my knees, the weight of the guilt and fear pressing down on me. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind, drowning out everything else. "You must join us." The last thing I remember is the darkness closing in, the feeling of being pulled into a void. The whispers were all around me, consuming me, pulling me down into the depths of my own mind. When I woke up, I was back in my bed, the morning light streaming through the window. But the whispers were still there, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface. I knew then that there was no escaping it. The voice, the whispers, the secrets, they were all a part of me now, and they always would be. The days following my visit to the cabin were a blur of sleepless nights and constant anxiety. The whispers never stopped, a relentless assault on my sanity. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, Sarah and Danny, trapped in the dark, pleading for my help. I tried to keep it together, but it was getting harder. My family was walking on eggshells around me, sensing something was terribly wrong. I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I explain the horrors that had taken root in my mind? One night, the whispers became screams. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was no longer just in my head. It was coming from downstairs. "Alex, help us." I stumbled out of bed, my legs weak, and made my way down the hall. The voice led me to the living room, where the device I had destroyed lay in pieces. But now the shards were glowing, pulsating with an eerie blue light. "Put it back together." I didn't want to, but I felt compelled. My hands moved on their own, fitting the pieces together like a macabre puzzle. As the last piece clicked into place, the device lit up, brighter than before. "You have to face the truth, Alex." The voice was different now, more insistent. It wasn't just Sarah and Danny. It was everyone. The secrets I had unearthed, the lies, the betrayals, they were all here, demanding justice. "Why are you doing this to me?" I cried, my voice breaking. "You need to understand, Alex. You can't hide from the past." I felt a wave of nausea, the room spinning. I collapsed onto the couch, clutching my head. Images flashed before my eyes. My mother with her lover, my father's affair, Emily's pregnancy. And then, the accident. "You were driving, Alex." "No," I screamed. "I wasn't. It was an accident." Remember, the memories came flooding back, sharper than ever. The party, the drinks, the car keys in my hand. Sarah and Danny laughing, unaware of the danger. The road winding and treacherous. The figure in the woods. A moment of distraction. The crash. "You killed them." I couldn't breathe. It was true. I had killed them. The guilt, the shame. It was all consuming. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of my sins pulling me under. "You must atone, Alex." I didn't know how. I was lost, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. Go to the lake. The lake. The place where it had all begun. I had to go back to face the truth. I grabbed my keys and stumbled out of the house, my mind in a haze. The drive to the lake was a blur, the road stretching out endlessly before me. I reached the cabin just as the first light of dawn was breaking. The lake was calm, the surface like glass. I walked to the edge, my reflection staring back at me. The figure in the woods was there, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You must join them, Alex." I took a step forward, the water lapping at my feet. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices urging me on. "Come with us." I waded into the lake, the cold water seeping into my bones. The figure stood before me, its face twisted into a grotesque smile. You can't escape the past. I felt the darkness closing in, the water pulling me down. The voices were all around me, consuming me. You must atone. I sank deeper, the weight of my guilt dragging me under. The last thing I saw was the figure, its eyes burning into my soul. When I woke up, I was on the shore, the morning sun warming my face. I was alone, the lake calm and peaceful, but the whispers were still there, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface. I knew then that there was no escaping it. The voice, the whispers, the secrets, they were all a part of me now, and there always would be. I spent the following days in a daze, going through the motions of life without really living. The whispers were relentless, a constant reminder of the darkness that had taken root in my soul. My family avoided me, sensing the change but unable to understand it. I was a ghost in my own home, haunted by memories and guilt. One night, as I lay awake in bed, the voice returned, louder and more insistent than ever. Alex, it's time. I sat up, my heart pounding. Time for what? Time to face the truth. I didn't want to. I was terrified of what I might find, but the voice wouldn't let me ignore it any longer. It guided me back to the basement, to the trunk that held so many of my forgotten memories. Open it. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. The contents were the same, old toys, clothes, and photographs. But this time, there was something new. At the bottom, covered in dust, was a small, leather-bound journal. Read it. I sat on the cold concrete floor, the journal heavy in my hands. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my mother's. I started reading, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. The journal detailed her affair, her guilt, and her attempts to reconcile with my father. But it also contained something else, something far more disturbing. There were entries about me, about my childhood. My mother wrote about strange occurrences, about how I would talk to imaginary friends who seemed all too real. She described nights when I would wake up screaming, claiming to see figures in the shadows. And then I found the entry about the accident. July 15th, 2005. Alex has been acting strangely since the accident. He insists he wasn't driving, but the police found his fingerprints on the wheel. He talks about a shadowy figure, but no one else saw it. I'm worried about him. He's not the same. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was true. I had been driving, but I wasn't alone. The figure, the one that had haunted my nightmares, had been there. It had been real. Face the truth, Alex. The voice was right. I couldn't hide from it any longer. I had to confront the figure, to understand what it wanted. That night, I returned to the lake. The air was thick with anticipation, the moon casting an eerie glow over the water. I stood at the edge, staring into the dark depths. "Show yourself," I whispered. The water rippled and the figure emerged, its eyes glowing with that unnatural light. It was taller than I remembered, its presence more menacing. "Why are you doing this to me?" I demanded. The figure stepped closer, its voice a low, guttural whisper. "You need to know the truth." "What truth?" It reached out, its icy hand brushing against my forehead. Memories flooded my mind, fragments of the past, twisted and distorted. I saw Sarah and Danny, their faces contorted in fear. I saw myself, running, leaving them behind. But there was more. I saw my mother, her guilt, her affair. I saw my father, broken and betrayed. I saw Emily, scared, and alone. And then I saw the truth. The figure wasn't just a random entity. It was a manifestation of my guilt, my fears, my darkest secrets. It had been with me all along, feeding off my pain, growing stronger with each lie, each betrayal. You are the key, Alex. You must free yourself. I realized what I had to do. I had to confront my demons, to face the consequences of my actions. I had to make amends. I started with my family. I told them everything, the affair, the pregnancy, the accident. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. My mother cried, my father was angry, and Emily was shocked. But they listened. They didn't understand, but they listened. And then, I returned to the lake one last time. The figure was there, waiting. I've told them, I said. I faced the truth. The figure nodded, its eyes dimming. You've taken the first step, but there's more to do. I knew what it meant. I had to make peace with Sarah and Danny. I had to let them go. I walked to the edge of the water, the memories of that fateful night, replaying in my mind. I whispered their names, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. The water rippled, and for a moment, I saw their faces, serene and at peace. The figure nodded, and then slowly, it dissolved into the night, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound silence. I knew the journey wasn't over, that there would always be shadows lurking in the corners of my mind. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had faced my demons, confronted the darkness within me, and now I was ready to start anew. I found alien tech on the dark web. Now the government is after me. Hey everyone, this is my first post, and honestly, I don't know how long I have before they find me. I just need to get this out there, so if something happens to me, someone will know the truth. It all started about 3 months ago. I'm an average guy living a pretty average life. I work a dead-end IT job, go home, play video games, and occasionally browse the darker corners of the internet. That's where everything went wrong. I've always been fascinated by the dark web. There's something inherently thrilling about diving into the unknown, finding things that most people don't even know exist. Most of it is pretty mundane, to be honest. Lots of drugs, fake IDs, and other illegal crap. But one night, I stumbled upon a forum that piqued my interest. It was called Tech Beyond Earth. The posts were cryptic, talking about technology that didn't seem human. I thought it was just a bunch of conspiracy nuts until I saw a post titled Alien Artifact for Sale, Serious Inquiries Only. My curiosity got the better of me. The post had a grainy photo of a metallic device, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It looked like a small, intricate puzzle box covered in strange symbols. The seller claimed it was found at a crash site in Roswell, New Mexico, in the late 40s. I contacted the seller, a guy who went by the handle Xenon42. He was paranoid, insisting on using encrypted messaging and never revealing his real name. After a lot of back and forth, he agreed to sell me the artifact for a ridiculous amount of Bitcoin. I know it sounds stupid, but something about the whole thing fascinated me. I had to have it. A week later, a small unmarked package arrived at my door. I opened it, and there it was, the artifact. Holding it in my hands, I felt an electric tingle run up my arms. It was cold to the touch, and much heavier than it looked. The symbols seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. For days, I couldn't figure out what it did. I spent hours turning it over, pressing the symbols, and trying different combinations. Then one night, something clicked. Literally. The artifact sprang open, revealing a glowing, pulsating core. I felt a sharp pain in my head and blacked out. When I came to, I was on the floor, the artifact still open next to me. But something was different. I started having these vivid dreams. No, not dreams, more like visions. I saw places that didn't exist on Earth. Strange landscapes with towering, otherworldly structures. I saw creatures, both beautiful and terrifying, and I felt their emotions, their thoughts. It was overwhelming. Then the headaches started. They were debilitating, like someone was drilling into my skull. No painkillers helped. I couldn't work, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Shadows moving, figures watching me. I thought I was losing my mind. One night, I woke up to find my apartment trashed. Papers were scattered everywhere, furniture overturned, and the artifact was gone. My laptop was still open, showing a series of encrypted messages from Xenon 42. He was frantic, telling me to destroy the artifact and get out of my apartment immediately. He said they were coming for me. I didn't understand who they were until I saw the men in black suits outside my window. I grabbed what I could and bolted. I've been on the run ever since, staying in cheap motels using burner phones and constantly looking over my shoulder. Every time I think I'm safe, I see them, always watching, always waiting. They don't try to take me in public. They want to corner me where no one can see. I've caught glimpses of their faces, cold, expressionless, like they're not even human. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The headaches are getting worse, and the visions are becoming more intense. I'm seeing things I can't even begin to describe, and I know I'm not alone. Sometimes I feel like something is inside my head, whispering to me, urging me to do things I don't want to do. If you're reading this, please be careful. Don't go looking for things that aren't meant to be found. And if you ever come across something that feels wrong, listen to your gut and walk away. I didn't, and now I'm paying the price. I'll try to post again if I can, but if I don't, you'll know why. After my last post, I had to lay low for a while. Things have gotten worse, much worse. I found a dingy motel on the outskirts of town, the kind where the sheets smell like smoke and the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbors arguing, or worse. It's not much, but it's safe, for now. The first night here, I barely slept. Every creak and groan of the building made my heart race. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps outside my door. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone was trying to be quiet, but not quiet enough. I held my breath, listening as they stopped right in front of my room. I could hear faint breathing through the door. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Whoever was out there, they weren't human. I grabbed the rusty knife I had found in the kitchenette and crept to the door. The footsteps continued down the hall, disappearing into the night. I peeked through the peephole, but it was too dark to see anything. The next morning, I found a small silver device stuck to the bottom of the door. It was no bigger than a coin, and it pulsed with a faint blue light. A tracking device. They knew exactly where I was. Panic set in. I packed my things in a hurry and hit the road again, heading deeper into the countryside. I avoided main roads and stuck to back roads, hoping to lose any tail I might have. I ended up in a tiny rundown cabin in the woods, miles from the nearest town. It felt safe, at least for the moment. That night, the dreams returned. I saw the same alien landscapes, the same bizarre creatures, but this time, they were closer, more vivid. I could feel their breath on my skin, hear their guttural whispers in my ear. They were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand their language. I woke up drenched in sweat, the artifact glowing faintly on the nightstand. I had no memory of taking it out of my bag. The next few days were a blur. The headaches were constant now, sharp and blinding. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound was a threat. I started noticing strange symbols appearing on my skin, the same ones that were on the artifact. They would appear and disappear, almost like they were burned into my flesh and then faded away. One morning, I woke up to find my hands covered in blood. I had no idea where it came from. I searched the cabin and found a stray cat, or what was left of it, torn to shreds in the corner. I had done this, but I didn't remember any of it. Something was taking control of me, using me. I tried to wash the blood off, but the sight of it, the metallic smell, it made me sick. I started leaving myself notes, writing down everything I did throughout the day, trying to keep track of my actions, but it didn't help. I found more blood, more mutilated animals. It was like a part of me was turning into a monster, and I couldn't stop it. Then came the voices. They started as whispers, barely audible, but they grew louder and more insistent. They told me to find more blood, more sacrifices. They promised power, knowledge, things no human should have. I resisted at first, but the pain was unbearable. It felt like my brain was being split open. I tried reaching out to Xenon 42 again, but his account had vanished. It was like he never existed. I searched for any information I could find about the artifact, but everything led to dead ends. No one knew anything, or if they did, they weren't talking. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The voices were screaming. The pain was blinding. I grabbed the artifact and smashed it against the wall. It didn't break. Instead, it opened, revealing a swirling, dark void inside. I was pulled into it, falling through darkness, seeing visions of worlds and beings beyond comprehension. When I woke up, I was back in the cabin, but everything was different. The air was colder, the light dimmer. I wasn't alone. Shadowy figures surrounded me, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. They spoke in unison, their voices merging into a single haunting whisper. They told me I was chosen, that I had opened the gate between worlds. They said the government was the least of my worries. Something much darker was coming, something that fed on fear and despair. And it was coming for me. I was just a pawn in a game far beyond human understanding. The artifact was a beacon, and I had lit it. I don't know how much longer I can fight this. The darkness is closing in, and the voices are getting stronger. If you're reading this, please, for the love of God, don't look for me. Don't try to find the artifact. Some things are better left in the shadows, unseen and untouched. I fear it's already too late for me. I didn't know what to do after that night in the cabin. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was inside me, using me. The days blurred together, each one more terrifying than the last. I kept moving, staying in abandoned buildings, deserted campsites, anywhere I thought they couldn't find me. But they always did. The shadows were no longer just in my mind. I could see them now, watching me from the corners of my vision, slipping through walls and windows, like they were made of smoke. Their eyes glowed with an eerie, cold light that sent chills down my spine. They whispered my name, over and over, a constant reminder that there was no escape. One night, while hiding out in an old, decrepit farmhouse, I found an old journal tucked away in a drawer. It belonged to someone named Marcus, and it was filled with frantic, barely legible notes about the artifact. He described finding it, much like I did, and the horrors that followed. His final entry was a warning: destroy it before it destroys you. Desperate, I tried everything to get rid of the artifact. I buried it, threw it into rivers, even tried to burn it, but every time it would find its way back to me, unharmed. It was like it was bonded to me, and no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. The more I tried to fight it, the stronger the voices became. I started losing track of time. Days, weeks, I couldn't tell anymore. My body was covered in those strange symbols, and my skin felt like it was on fire. I could barely eat or sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that dark void, falling through endless nothingness, surrounded by those creatures. They showed me things, terrible, unimaginable things, entire worlds consumed by darkness, civilizations destroyed, all because of the artifact. The government agents were still after me, but now I knew they weren't the only ones. Others were coming, drawn by the power of the artifact. I saw them in my dreams, beings from other worlds, hungry for destruction. They were using me to get here, and once they did, they would bring the same devastation to Earth. One particularly cold night, I was hiding in an abandoned church. The place was falling apart, but it was quiet, and that was all I cared about. I sat in one of the pews, staring at the artifact, feeling its cold, pulsing energy. The whispers were louder than ever, telling me to embrace the power, to let it consume me. That's when I saw her, a little girl, no older than 6, standing in the aisle. She was pale, almost translucent, with long dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for her face. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with those haunting eyes. I knew she wasn't real, another vision sent by the artifact, but she felt so real. She walked up to me and placed her hand on the artifact. The symbols on my skin burned brighter, and I felt a surge of energy rush through me. The voices screamed, but I could hear her voice over them, soft and calm. "You have to end this," she said, "before it's too late." The visions came then, more vivid than ever. I saw a way to destroy the artifact, a place deep underground, filled with ancient machinery and strange glowing crystals. It was a place out of time, out of this world. I didn't know how to get there, but the vision showed me the way. I packed my things and left the church, following the vision's instructions. The journey was long and exhausting, taking me through dense forests, across rivers, and into dark, winding caves. The further I went, the stronger the artifact's pull became, like it was guiding me to its final resting place. After days of travel, I found it, a massive underground chamber filled with machinery that hummed with an otherworldly energy. The crystals glowed with a soft blue light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the center of the chamber was a pedestal, and I knew what I had to do. I placed the artifact on the pedestal, and the machinery sprang to life. The ground shook, and the air was filled with a high-pitched whine. The artifact glowed brighter and brighter until I could barely look at it. The voices were deafening now, screaming in rage and fear. I stepped back, watching as the artifact was engulfed in a beam of light. The symbols on my skin burned white hot, and I fell to the ground, writhing in pain. I could feel the artifact's power being drained, pulled into the machinery, and then, with a blinding flash, it was gone. The chamber fell silent, and I lay there, gasping for breath. The symbols on my skin faded, and the voices were gone. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, mixed with a deep, bone-chilling fear. I had destroyed the artifact, but at what cost? The visions still haunted me, the memories of these dark worlds and the beings that inhabited them. I don't know what comes next. The government agents might still be after me, but without the artifact, I'm just another paranoid lunatic. I can live with that. What I can't live with is the knowledge that somewhere, out there in the dark, those beings are still watching, waiting, and they won't stop until they find another way in. I thought destroying the artifact would end my nightmare, but I was wrong. It was only the beginning. The underground chamber where I left the artifact felt like a tomb. I climbed out, thinking I could finally put all of this behind me, but the darkness followed me. The first sign something was wrong came the next morning. I woke up in a small rural inn, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions. My skin still felt raw where the symbols had been, but they were gone. For a brief moment, I felt hope, but then I saw the news. The TV in the lobby was playing a news report about strange occurrences in towns near where I had destroyed the artifact. People were disappearing, and others were found mutilated, their bodies covered in symbols that looked disturbingly familiar. My heart sank. I hadn't stopped anything. I had only unleashed something far worse. I decided to head back to the city, hoping to blend into the crowd and find answers. The journey was uneventful, but my mind was racing. Every shadow seemed alive, every noise a potential threat. When I finally reached the city, it felt surreal, like I was walking through a dream where nothing was quite real. I found a cheap apartment and tried to piece my life back together, but the nightmares returned with vengeance. Every night I saw those otherworldly beings, their eyes boring into my soul. They showed me visions of destruction and chaos, cities burning, people screaming. I could feel their hunger, their desire to consume and destroy. Then the headaches started again. They were different this time, sharper, more focused. They felt like something was trying to drill into my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I avoided people, afraid that I might hurt them or worse. One night, I was woken by a loud banging on my door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The banging continued, relentless and demanding. I grabbed the knife I kept under my pillow and crept towards the door. I could hear muffled voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The door burst open, and men in black suits stormed in, guns drawn. I barely had time to react before they tackled me to the ground, pinning my arms behind my back. They cuffed me and dragged me out of the apartment, not saying a word. They took me to a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city. It looked like an ordinary office building, but inside, it was anything but. They led me down a series of hallways to a small windowless room. The walls were bare, and the only furniture was a metal table and 2 chairs. They shoved me into one of the chairs and left, locking the door behind them. I waited for what felt like hours before a man entered the room. He was tall and thin, with a face that looked like it had seen too much. He sat down across from me, holding his hands on the table. "You've caused quite a mess," he said, his voice cold and measured. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You're not the first to find one of those artifacts," he continued, "but you're the first to survive this long. Most people don't make it past the first vision." He explained that the artifact was a beacon, a way for those beings to find their way into our world. By destroying it, I had only delayed the inevitable. They were still coming, and they would stop at nothing to get here. The disappearances and mutilations were just the beginning. "We need your help," he said, leaning forward. "You've been inside their world. You've seen them. We need to know what you know if we're going to have any chance of stopping them." I didn't trust him, but what choice did I have? I told him everything about the artifact, the visions, the voices. He listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. When I finished, he sat back and nodded. "We're going to keep you here for a while," he said, "for your safety and ours. There's a lot we don't understand, and we need time to figure this out." They moved me to a different room, more comfortable, but still a prison. I spent my days being prodded and questioned, my nights haunted by nightmares. They ran tests, poked and prodded, trying to understand what had happened to me. But as the days passed, I began to notice changes. My headaches grew worse, and I started seeing things, shadowy figures lurking in the corners, whispers that I couldn't quite make out. The scientists noticed too. They kept their distance, watching me with a mixture of fear and fascination. Then one night, everything changed. I woke up to the sound of alarms blaring and people shouting. The building was shaking, and I could hear the sounds of gunfire and screams. I stumbled out of bed, my head pounding, and saw them, those creatures from my visions. They were here, tearing through the facility like it was made of paper. I ran, dodging debris and bodies, trying to find a way out. The hallways were chaos, filled with panicked scientists and soldiers trying to hold off the invaders. I made it to the exit and burst outside, gasping for breath. The city was in flames. The creatures were everywhere, ripping through buildings, dragging people into the streets. I could hear the screams of the dying, the roar of the fires. It was the end of the world, just like in my visions. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I collapsed in an alley, too exhausted to move. The creatures were still out there hunting, but for now I was safe. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the sounds of destruction, and prayed for the nightmare to end. I woke up in that alley, bruised and battered, but alive. The city was a wasteland, buildings reduced to rubble, streets littered with debris and bodies. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of death. I could hear distant screams and the guttural growls of those creatures, but they seemed farther away now. I had to move, had to find somewhere safe. I stumbled through the ruins, every step a painful reminder of how broken I was. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, the dark corners hiding unimaginable horrors. I kept my knife in hand, ready to defend myself, though I knew it was useless against the monsters I had unleashed. As I wandered, I thought about the man in the suit and what he had told me. It didn't make sense. If they knew about the artifacts, why didn't they do more to contain them? Or was this always part of some bigger plan? My head throbbed with questions, but answers were elusive. I found a small group of survivors huddled in the basement of an old office building. They were scared and desperate, but they welcomed me when they saw I was alone. There were a few children, their faces streaked with dirt and tears, clutching to their mothers. The men had makeshift weapons, pipes, bats, anything they could find. It wasn't much, but it was something. We stayed hidden for days, scrounging for food and water, keeping our heads down. We whispered stories of what we had seen, trying to piece together the chaos. I learned that the creatures seemed to avoid sunlight, staying hidden during the day and emerging at night to hunt. That small bit of information became our lifeline. One night, as the sun was setting, a young woman in our group, Sarah, came to me. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she kept glancing over her shoulder. She had found something, a way into the sewers. It wasn't ideal, but it was safer than staying out in the open. We gathered the group and made our way to the sewer entrance. The stench was overwhelming, but it was a small price to pay for safety. We navigated the dark, damp tunnels, the only light coming from a flickering flashlight. The echoes of our footsteps were a constant reminder that we were not alone. Down in the sewers, we found more survivors. They were in bad shape, wounded, sick, and terrified. They told us stories of other groups, other cities. The creatures were spreading, and there seemed to be no end in sight. The government was nowhere to be found, the military overwhelmed. It was every man for himself now. One night, as we huddled in the dark, a voice came over a makeshift radio someone had salvaged. It was garbled, but we could make out enough to understand. There was a safe zone, a place where people were gathering, fortifying against the creatures. It was a long shot, but it was hope. We decided to make a break for it at dawn. The journey was treacherous, but staying put meant certain death. We moved quickly and quietly, avoiding the main streets, ducking into buildings and alleys. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. We lost people along the way. The creatures were relentless, and sometimes it was all we could do to keep moving. By the time we reached the outskirts of the safe zone, our numbers had dwindled, but those of us who remained were determined. The safe zone was surrounded by high walls and barbed wire, guarded by armed men and women who looked as haunted as we felt. They let us in, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Inside, it was like another world. There were tents and makeshift shelters, medical stations, and food supplies. People moved with purpose, rebuilding what they could, protecting what they had left. It wasn't much, but it was something. I tried to blend in, to forget the horrors I had seen, but the nightmares followed me. Every night I saw these creatures, their eyes glowing in the darkness, their whispers promising destruction. I knew they wouldn't stop, couldn't stop, until they had consumed everything. One day, as I was helping to reinforce the walls, I saw a familiar face in the crowd. It was the man in the suit, the one who had interrogated me. He looked different, tired, older, but it was him. He caught my eye and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of our shared burden. We didn't speak, but I knew what he was thinking. The fight was far from over. The creatures were still out there, and we had to be ready. We couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the mistakes that had been made, but we could fight for the future. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the safe zone, I stood on the wall, knife in hand, and watched the darkness. The whispers were still there, but now they felt different, less like a promise of doom, and more like a challenge. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for certain. I would keep fighting, keep surviving, for as long as it took, until the darkness was pushed back and the light reclaimed our world. I found the worst gruesome secret of Mr. Beast on the dark web. It all started when I was browsing the dark web out of sheer curiosity. I know, it sounds cliche, but I wasn't looking for anything illegal or sinister, just exploring the depths of the internet that most people never see. I've always been fascinated by the obscure and the forbidden, and the dark web seemed like the ultimate place for that. One night, I stumbled upon a forum thread that piqued my interest. The title was Crypto Prophecies, the End of Bitcoin. It caught my eye because, like many others, I had invested a fair bit in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. The idea that someone could predict the end of Bitcoin seemed laughable, but also intriguing. The post was written in a way that felt different from the usual conspiracy theory nonsense. It was detailed, almost scholarly, with charts and graphs that I didn't fully understand, but seemed legit. The author claimed to have access to classified information from various global financial institutions and shadowy government agencies. They talked about a specific date, just a few months away, when Bitcoin would plummet to zero due to a coordinated attack by major world powers. There was a link at the bottom of the post, inviting those brave enough to know the truth to visit a certain website for more details. Without thinking twice, I clicked on it. The website was crude but functional, filled with walls of text, more graphs, and a countdown timer. As I read through the content, I felt a growing sense of dread. It wasn't just the prediction of Bitcoin's collapse that was disturbing. It was the sheer level of detail. The author described secret meetings, surveillance footage, and audio recordings of conversations between high-ranking officials discussing their plans. What really freaked me out was a section that listed the names of people who had visited the site. My name was there, along with my IP address, and even some personal details like my email and home address. There was a warning at the bottom. You've seen too much. They know you're here. I immediately closed my browser and shut down my computer, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I couldn't shake the paranoia. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had read. I kept telling myself it was just an elaborate hoax, but deep down, I wasn't sure. The next day, I tried to go about my usual routine, but everything felt off. At work, I was distracted, constantly looking over my shoulder. My coworkers noticed and asked if I was okay, but I just brushed them off, saying I didn't sleep well. That evening, I got home and found an envelope on my doorstep. It was plain, with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message typed in bold letters. We're watching you. Stay silent. My heart pounded in my chest. I quickly scanned my surroundings, but no one was there. I rushed inside, locked all the doors and windows, and tried to calm myself down. This had to be some kind of prank. Maybe someone from the dark web forum was messing with me. But how did they know where I lived? I spent the rest of the night glued to my windows, peeking out every few minutes, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But nothing happened. I finally went to bed, exhausted, but sleep didn't come easy. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud knock on my front door. My heart leapt into my throat. Who the hell would be at my door at this hour? I grabbed a baseball bat from under my bed and crept downstairs. I peered through the peephole and saw 2 men standing there. They were dressed in black suits, looking eerily out of place in my suburban neighborhood. One of them knocked again, louder this time. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to speak with you," one of the men said. His voice was calm but authoritative. "About what?" I asked, stalling for time, my mind racing for an escape plan. "It's about what you saw online." "Open the door, please." Panic surged through me. How did they know? Were they really from some government agency? Or was this an elaborate ruse by someone with too much time on their hands? "Go away, or I'm calling the police," I shouted. There was a brief silence. Then the other man spoke, his voice cold and menacing. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. You have 10 seconds to open this door." I backed away from the door, clutching the bat so tightly my knuckles turned white. My thoughts were a jumbled mess. Should I open the door and hear them out, or should I make a run for it? Before I could decide, the door burst open, the force of it knocking me to the ground. The two men stormed in, and I barely had time to react before one of them grabbed me, pinning me to the floor. "You shouldn't have gone poking around where you don't belong," he hissed, his face inches from mine. His breath was hot and rancid, and I could see the malice in his eyes. The other man pulled out a syringe filled with a murky liquid. I struggled, trying to break free, but the grip on me was ironclad. He jabbed the needle into my arm, and I felt a cold sensation spread through my veins. The room started to spin, and my vision blurred. The last thing I heard before everything went black was the man's voice, chilling and final. "Welcome to the end of your world." When I came to, I was in a dimly lit room. The walls were concrete, and there were no windows, just a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. I tried to move, but found myself restrained to a cold metal chair. My wrists and ankles were bound with thick, heavy straps, and my head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. I scanned the room, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness. There was a metal table in front of me, with various instruments laid out in a disturbingly orderly fashion. Some looked like medical tools, others were more industrial. My stomach churned at the sight. A door creaked open, and one of the men from before stepped in. He was carrying a laptop and a syringe filled with the same murky liquid they had used on me earlier. He set the laptop on the table and turned it to face me. The screen lit up with the familiar website I had visited on the dark web, the countdown timer now showing significantly less time than before. The man in black, whom I now referred to as Suit 1 in my head, smiled coldly. "Welcome back," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "We have a lot to discuss." "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice cracking with a mix of fear and anger. "I don't know anything. I just stumbled onto that site by accident." Suit 1 ignored my outburst, instead pressing a few keys on the laptop. The screen changed, showing a list of names, mine highlighted in red. "You and others like you have seen something you weren't supposed to. Information that, if leaked, could disrupt the very fabric of our carefully constructed world." I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of his words. "What do you mean? This is just some conspiracy theory, right? Bitcoin collapsing, secret meetings. It's all nonsense, isn't it?" Suit 1's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. "You're naive. This isn't a game. We've spent years planning, ensuring everything falls into place at the right moment. And now, thanks to your curiosity, you've jeopardized everything." He picked up the syringe and tapped it lightly, expelling a few drops of the liquid. "This, however, is our insurance. A little cocktail designed to ensure your compliance and, if necessary, erase certain memories, Panic surged through me. No, please. I won't say anything, I swear. Just let me go. Suit 1 ignored my pleas and approached, the needle glinting ominously in the dim light. I struggled against the restraints, but it was no use. He injected the liquid into my arm, and a cold numbness spread through my body. My vision blurred, and I felt a strange sensation, like my mind was being wrapped in a thick fog. The door opened again, and Suit 2 entered, carrying a bulky camera. He set it up on a tripod, pointing it directly at me. "We need a record," he said, his voice as cold and emotionless as his partner's, "for posterity, and in case anyone else gets the same idea." They began to question me, their voices droning on as I fought to keep my thoughts coherent. They asked about the website, what I had seen, who I had told. I answered automatically, my responses sluggish and disjointed. The drug was doing its job, muddling my mind, making it hard to think. At some point, they left me alone in the room, the camera still recording. My head lolled to one side, and I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching everything from outside my own body. Time lost all meaning. I don't know how long I was there, but eventually, the door opened again. This time, it wasn't Suit 1 or Suit 2. A woman entered, dressed in a white lab coat. She had a clipboard and an air of cold efficiency. She checked my restraints, noted something on her clipboard, and then turned her attention to me. "You're lucky," she said, her tone clinical and devoid of emotion. "They usually don't let people live after seeing what you've seen, but you're going to help us with something special." She set the clipboard down and pulled out a vial of clear liquid from her pocket. "This will counteract the effects of the initial drug," she explained. "We need you lucid for the next part." She injected the liquid into my arm, and almost immediately, the fog began to lift. Clarity returned, along with a surge of fear. "What are you going to do to me?" I asked, my voice trembling. The woman gave me a cold smile. "You're going to help us send a message to anyone else who thinks they can uncover our secrets and walk away unscathed." She stepped back, and Suit 1 and Suit 2 returned, both wearing rubber gloves. They untied me from the chair and forced me to my feet. I was too weak to resist. They dragged me out of the room and down a long, sterile hallway lined with more doors. Muffled sounds came from some of the rooms. Cries, pleas, the unmistakable sounds of suffering. We reached a larger room, filled with ominous-looking equipment and a large metal table in the center. They strapped me down again, securing my wrists and ankles with heavy leather straps. The camera was there too, recording everything. Suit 1 leaned over me, his face inches from mine. "This is your last chance," he said softly. "Tell us who else you've spoken to about what you saw." "No one," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I haven't told anyone." He nodded, as if he expected that answer. "Then we'll make sure no one else ever hears about it." They began their work, methodical and precise, inflicting pain in ways I couldn't have imagined. They weren't trying to extract information anymore. They were sending a message. I screamed until my voice gave out, the sound echoing in that cold, sterile room. When I woke up, I was back in my house. At first, I thought it had all been a nightmare, but the pain in my body told me otherwise. My wrists and ankles were bruised, and my throat felt raw from screaming. I staggered to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and barely recognized the person staring back at me. My face was gaunt, eyes bloodshot, and there were dark circles under them. I had lost track of time. How long had they kept me? The memories flooded back, each one more horrifying than the last. The torture, the cold clinical detachment of my captors, the feeling of complete helplessness. I retched into the sink, my stomach heaving with the trauma of it all. After what felt like hours, I managed to pull myself together enough to call the police. They arrived quickly, taking my statement with a mix of skepticism and concern. They noted my injuries, but seemed unsure of what to make of my story. I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't lived it, I wouldn't have believed it either. They promised to investigate, but left me with the distinct impression that they thought I was crazy. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. Every knock on the door, every unexpected sound sent my heart racing. I barely slept, plagued by nightmares that replayed my ordeal over and over again. I tried to go back to work, but I couldn't focus. My coworkers noticed my jumpiness, the way I flinched at sudden movements or loud noises. They started avoiding me, whispering behind my back. One evening, as I was trying to drown my anxiety in a bottle of whiskey, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "We warned you." My hands trembled as I opened it. The message was simple, a video file. I hesitated, then clicked play. The screen showed grainy footage of a man sitting in a chair, bound and gagged. It took me a moment to realize it was my friend Tom. We had met at a crypto conference a few years back and kept in touch ever since. He had always been skeptical of the dark web and my fascination with it. The video cut to a close-up of Tom's face, his eyes wide with fear. A figure stepped into the frame, one of the men in black suits. He spoke directly to the camera, his voice calm and measured. "This is what happens when you don't heed our warnings." The camera panned down, showing Tom's hands. They had been brutally mangled, fingers broken and twisted at unnatural angles. He tried to scream, but the gag muffled his cries. The figure leaned in close to Tom, whispering something in his ear that I couldn't make out. Then the screen went black. I stared at the screen, numb with horror. They had found Tom because of me. They were using him to send a message, to show me the consequences of my actions. I had to do something, but what? The police hadn't believed me, and I had no idea where they were keeping Tom. Desperation set in. I started searching online for any clues, any whispers about these men or their organization. I reached out to contacts in the crypto community, trying to piece together any information that could help, but it was like hitting a brick wall. No one knew anything, or if they did, they were too scared to talk. One night, as I was poring over message boards and forums, my phone buzzed with a notification. Another email, this time with a location and a time. "Come alone if you want to see him again." I knew it was a trap, but what choice did I have? I couldn't abandon Tom, not after what they had done to him. I grabbed a flashlight and a baseball bat, the only weapons I had, and headed out into the night. The address led me to an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the town. The place was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel under my feet. I took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy metal door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. Broken windows let in slivers of moonlight, casting long shadows across the floor. I called out, my voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "Tom, are you here?" A faint noise came from the far end of the warehouse. I gripped the bat tighter and made my way towards the sound. As I rounded a corner, I saw him. Tom was tied to a chair, just like in the video. His head hung low, and he looked barely conscious. I rushed over, fumbling with the knots that held him. "Tom, it's me. I'm here to get you out." His eyes fluttered open, and he tried to speak, but his voice was a hoarse whisper. "Behind you." I turned just in time to see Suit 1 stepping out of the shadows, a cruel smile on his face. "You really shouldn't have come." Before I could react, something hard slammed into the back of my head, and everything went black. When I woke up this time, I was back in that cold, sterile room. My head throbbed, and my vision was blurry. The restraints were tighter now, cutting into my skin. The harsh light from the bulb above was almost blinding, casting sharp shadows around the room. The air was filled with a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. Suit 1 and Suit 2 were there, flanking the woman in the lab coat. She was holding a syringe filled with a bright red liquid. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Now you've put both your life and your friend's life in even greater danger." "Where's Tom?" I demanded, my voice shaking but defiant. "What have you done to him?" Suit 2 chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Tom's fate is the least of your worries right now." The woman stepped closer, holding the syringe up to the light. "This will help you see things more clearly," she said almost tenderly. "It will show you the truth." I struggled against the restraints, but it was no use. The needle pierced my skin, and a burning sensation spread through my veins. My vision swam, and the room around me seemed to warp and twist. I felt my mind being pulled apart, every thought, every memory laid bare. "Let me explain something to you," Suit 1 said, leaning in close. "You see, the world you know is just a facade. There are powers at work far beyond your comprehension, forces that manipulate events on a global scale. Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, they are merely tools, pawns in a much larger game. The drug was doing something to me, heightening my senses, distorting reality. I could see colors that didn't exist, hear whispers that came from nowhere. It was like my mind was being opened up to some dark, hidden truth. Years ago, a group was formed," the woman continued. "A coalition of the world's most influential and secretive entities, governments, corporations, shadow organizations, all working together to control the flow of information, money, and power. The prediction you saw about Bitcoin's collapse, it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle." Suit 2 walked over to the laptop and opened it, showing a live feed of Tom. He was in a different room, still tied to the chair, barely conscious. "Your friend is paying the price for your curiosity," he said. "But there's still time to save him." My heart pounded in my chest. "What do you want from me?" The woman smiled, a chilling expression that sent shivers down my spine. "We want you to help us spread our message. You will be our mouthpiece, our prophet. You will go back to your life and tell the world what you saw, what you learned, but you will do it our way, with our guidance." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog. "Why me? Why not just silence me like everyone else?" Suit 1's smile was cold. "Because fear is a powerful tool, and when people hear about what happened to you, they will think twice before digging into things they shouldn't." The woman injected me with another syringe, and the pain receded, replaced by a sense of clarity, albeit one laced with dread. "You have a choice," she said softly. "Comply, and we will release your friend. Resist, and he will suffer a fate worse than death." I looked at the screen, at Tom's battered face. I couldn't let him die because of me. I nodded slowly, tears streaming down my face. I'll do it. Just let him go. The woman patted my cheek, almost affectionately. Good. Very good. Now, we have some preparations to make. They released me from the chair, but my legs were too weak to stand. Suit 1 and Suit 2 half dragged, half carried me to another room, where they began to prepare me for my new role. They cleaned me up, dressed me in fresh clothes, and gave me a script to memorize. Every word, every phrase had been carefully crafted to convey their message. As they worked, they explained more about their organization, the Global Control Network, a secret cabal that had been manipulating world events for decades. They spoke of political coups, economic collapses, even natural disasters, all orchestrated to maintain their control. By the time they were done, I felt like a puppet, strings pulled tight by unseen hands. They took me to a small windowless room with a camera set up, similar to a recording studio. The woman stood behind the camera, her eyes boring into mine. Remember, we are always watching. Say what you need to say, and your friend will live. I nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The camera light blinked red, and I began to speak, the words spilling out in a rehearsed but earnest tone. I told the story they wanted me to tell, about the end of Bitcoin, the global conspiracy, the dangers of curiosity. When I finished, they turned off the camera. The woman smiled, pleased. Well done. Now, let's see about your friend. They led me back to the room where Tom was being held. He was conscious, but weak. When he saw me, his eyes filled with relief and gratitude. You did it, he whispered. You saved me. Suit 1 stepped forward, holding a small device. A token of our appreciation, he said, handing it to me. This will ensure you stay on the right path. I looked at the device, a small tracker. You'll be monitoring us. The woman nodded. For your safety and ours, now go. And remember, we are always watching. They released Tom, and we stumbled out of the warehouse into the night. I supported him as we walked, my mind reeling from everything that had happened. We made it back to my car, and I drove us to my place in silence. Tom fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from his ordeal. I sat up, staring at the device in my hand. My life had been turned upside down, and I was now a pawn in a game I barely understood. I knew I had to keep up the facade, to do what they asked. But deep down, I swore I would find a way to bring them down, to expose their lies, and free myself from their grip. For now, though, I had to play along, to protect Tom and myself. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia and fear. I went through the motions, pretending to live my life as normally as possible, while constantly looking over my shoulder. The device they had given me was always in my pocket, a constant reminder that they were watching. Tom stayed with me, slowly recovering from his ordeal. We didn't talk much about what had happened. There was an unspoken understanding that speaking of it might bring more danger. I made the video public, posting it on various platforms with the help of a few anonymous accounts. It quickly went viral, just as they had intended. People were terrified, speculating wildly about the end of Bitcoin and the shadowy organization pulling the strings. I hated myself for spreading their lies, but I had no choice. One night, I was sitting in my living room, watching the news coverage of my video, when the power went out. The room plunged into darkness, and my heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the room for any signs of intruders. "Tom?" I called out, my voice trembling. Are you there?" There was no response. I slowly made my way to his room, every creak of the floorboards making my skin crawl. When I opened the door, I found his bed empty, the sheets thrown aside. Panic set in. "Tom?" I called louder, hoping he had just gone to the bathroom or the kitchen, but the house was eerily silent. I searched every room, but he was nowhere to be found. Just as I was about to call the police, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. It was a video file. Dreading what I might see, I pressed play. The video showed Tom, bound and gagged again, but this time in a different location. He looked worse than before, his face bruised and swollen. The camera panned to reveal Suit 1 standing next to him, holding a knife. "We warned you," Suit 1 said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "We told you to comply, and yet you continue to defy us." I felt a wave of nausea as the camera zoomed in on Tom's face, his eyes filled with terror. "This is your final warning," Suit 1 continued. "Stop your search for the truth, or your friend will suffer the consequences." The video ended, leaving me staring at my phone in horror. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. They had Tom again, and this time they wouldn't be so lenient. I knew I couldn't go to the police. They had proven to be useless. I was on my own. I spent the next few days in a haze, desperately trying to figure out how to save Tom. I scoured the dark web, reaching out to anyone who might have information about the global control network. Most people either didn't know anything or were too scared to talk. The few who did respond offered only cryptic hints and warnings to back off. Then one night, I received a message from an anonymous user. It was short and to the point. "Meet me at the old pier at midnight. Come alone." They spoke of political coups, economic collapses, even natural disasters, all orchestrated to maintain their control. By the time they were done, I felt like a puppet, strings pulled tight by unseen hands. They took me to a small windowless room with a camera set up, similar to a recording studio. The woman stood behind the camera, her eyes boring into mine. "Remember, we are always watching. Say what you need to say, and your friend will live." I nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The camera light blinked red, and I began to speak, the words spilling out in a rehearsed but earnest tone. I told the story they wanted me to tell, about the end of Bitcoin, the global conspiracy, the dangers of curiosity. When I finished, they turned off the camera. The woman smiled, pleased. "Well done. Now, let's see about your friend." They led me back to the room where Tom was being held. He was conscious, but weak. When he saw me, his eyes filled with relief and gratitude. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved me." Suit 1 stepped forward, holding a small device. "A token of our appreciation," he said, handing it to me. "This will ensure you stay on the right path." I looked at the device, a small tracker. "You'll be monitoring us?" The woman nodded. "For your safety, and ours. Now go, and remember, we are always watching." They released Tom, and we stumbled out of the warehouse into the night. I supported him as we walked, my mind reeling from everything that had happened. We made it back to my car, and I drove us to my place in silence. Tom fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from his ordeal. I sat up, staring at the device in my hand. My life had been turned upside down, and I was now a pawn in a game I barely understood. I knew I had to keep up the facade, to do what they asked. But deep down, I swore I would find a way to bring them down, to expose their lies and free myself from their grip. For now, though, I had to play along to protect Tom and myself. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia and fear. I went through the motions, pretending to live my life as normally as possible, while constantly looking over my shoulder. The device they had given me was always in my pocket, a constant reminder that they were watching. Tom stayed with me, slowly recovering from his ordeal. We didn't talk much about what had happened. There was an unspoken understanding that speaking of it might bring more danger. I made the video public, posting it on various platforms with the help of a few anonymous accounts. It quickly went viral, just as they had intended. People were terrified, speculating wildly about the end of Bitcoin and the shadowy organization pulling the strings. I hated myself for spreading their lies, but I had no choice. One night, I was sitting in my living room, watching the news coverage of my video, when the power went out. The room plunged into darkness, and my heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the room for any signs of intruders. "Tom?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Are you there?" There was no response. I slowly made my way to his room, every creak of the floorboards making my skin crawl. When I opened the door, I found his bed empty, the sheets thrown aside. Panic set in. "Tom?" I called louder, hoping he had just gone to the bathroom or the kitchen, but the house was eerily silent. I searched every room, but he was nowhere to be found. Just as I was about to call the police, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. It was a video file. Dreading what I might see, I pressed play. The video showed Tom, bound and gagged again, but this time in a different location. He looked worse than before, his face bruised and swollen. The camera panned to reveal Suit 1 standing next to him, holding a knife. "We warned you," Suit 1 said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "We told you to comply, and yet you continued to defy us." I felt a wave of nausea as the camera zoomed in on Tom's face, his eyes filled with terror. "This is your final warning," Suit 1 continued. "Stop your search for the truth, or your friend will suffer the consequences." The video ended, leaving me staring at my phone in horror. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. They had Tom again, and this time they wouldn't be so lenient. I knew I couldn't go to the police. They had proven to be useless. I was on my own. I spent the next few days in a haze, desperately trying to figure out how to save Tom. I scoured the dark web, reaching out to anyone who might have information about the global control network. Most people either didn't know anything or were too scared to talk. The few who did respond offered only cryptic hints and warnings to back off. Then one night, I received a message from an anonymous user. It was short and to the point. "Meet me at the old pier at midnight. Come alone." I knew it was risky, but I had no other options. I grabbed my baseball bat and headed out, my heart pounding with fear and determination. The pier was deserted, the only sounds the lapping of water and the distant hum of the city. A figure emerged from the shadows, a hooded man with a grizzled face. He looked around nervously before speaking. "You're in deep, aren't you?" I nodded. "They have my friend. I need to know how to stop them." He sighed, glancing over his shoulder. "There's no stopping them, not in the way you think, but there is a way to get your friend back." "How?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "You have to make a trade," he said. "Information for his life. They have weaknesses, vulnerabilities. Find them, expose them, and they might let him go." "How do I do that?" I asked, feeling a glimmer of hope. He handed me a flash drive. This contains everything I've gathered over the years. It's not much, but it's a start. Use it wisely. Before I could thank him, he turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving me alone with the flash drive in my hand. I hurried home and plugged the drive into my computer. It was filled with documents, videos, and emails detailing the operations of the global control network. There were names, dates, locations, enough to cause serious damage if it got out. I knew what I had to do. I compiled the information into a comprehensive dossier and prepared to release it online. But first, I needed to ensure Tom's safety. I sent a message to the anonymous number. I have what you want. Release Tom, and I'll give you everything. Hours passed without a response. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, my phone buzzed. A message. Agreed. Leave the files at the designated drop point. You'll find Tom there. The drop point was an abandoned building on the outskirts of the town. I printed the documents and placed them in a sealed envelope, then headed out. The building was dilapidated, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. I found the designated spot and left the envelope there. As instructed, I waited, my heart racing. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a car pull up. Suit 1 and Suit 2 emerged, dragging a barely conscious Tom with them. They shoved him towards me, and he collapsed at my feet. We have what we need, Suit 1 said. Consider this your last warning. Stay silent, or next time, there will be no negotiations. They got back in their car and drove off, leaving me to help Tom to his feet. He was weak, but alive. We made our way back to my house, neither of us saying a word. We both knew that we had narrowly escaped something far worse. In the following days, I released the dossier online, using every means available to ensure it spread far and wide. The reaction was immediate and explosive. News outlets picked up the story, and the world began to learn about the shadowy organization that had been manipulating global events. But even as the public outcry grew, I knew it wasn't over. The global control network was vast and powerful, and they wouldn't take this lightly. Tom and I had to stay hidden, constantly on the move, always looking over our shoulders. We had struck a blow against them, but the war was far from over. They were out there, watching, waiting for their moment to strike back. And I knew that as long as I lived, I would be a target. The end of Bitcoin might have been averted, but the real battle was just beginning. And this time, there would be no turning back.